Hello everyone, this is my presentation on my essay that I chose, which was Civilize Them with a Stick. Civilize Them with a Stick was a personal narrative written by Mary Bravebird with Richard Erdoe. I apologize if I mispronounced that name. The authors just described their experience at a private Catholic missionary school that sought to reform Native Americans and conform them to stereotypical white cultural norms. This essay really brought into perspective how the education system is used to conform and construct minorities into typical white norms by means of reinforcement tactics, which can be physically, emotionally, and mentally abusive. So this is an excerpt from Civilize Them with a Stick. I thought that it really just portrays the nature of this school and what the authors went through, and what happens or what can happen today. It says, the kids were taken away from their villages and pueblos in their blankets and moccasins, kept completely isolated from their families, sometimes for as long as 10 years, suddenly coming back, their short hair slick with pomade, their necks raw from stiff high collars, their thick jackets always short in the sleeves and pinching under the arms, their tight patent leather shoes giving them corns, the girls in starched white blouses and clumsy high-button boots, caricatures of white people. And the picture at the top here is an actual photograph from the St. Francis Mission boarding school where the authors attended. To provide context on how the education system conforms minorities, it's important to understand the history of education and race. So in 1954, the Brown versus Board of Education was a really big lawsuit that happened because a father was outraged that his daughter was not allowed to attend an all-white school, simply because it was an all-white school. This controversy led the Supreme Court ruling segregation of schools as unconstitutional. And that moved right into the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which bans discrimination and gives authority to the federal government to enforce any laws for issues of inequality and segregation. The Swan versus Charlotte Mecklenburg lawsuit in 1971 helped to improve access for minorities to quality education, especially by improving busing routes and building schools closer to some of the more minority populated towns and cities and things like that. The social impact of education and race. So I found this part particularly interesting. If you look at the graphic I put here on the screen, you'll see that the top shows preschool enrollment, and typically there is a average of about 1 to 2.53, one minority to about 2.5, 3 white kids that are enrolled. However, if you look at the line just below that, it shows the suspension rate of students. So even though there's less minorities enrolled into preschool, the minorities have a much higher chance of being suspended, expelled, or having some other disciplinary action applied towards them. And this kind of suggests that minority students that enter into especially public education systems are subjected to preconceived bias, which impacts their educational pursuits. This preconceived bias is given towards them before they can even have the chance to show their performance, which may hinder them from being able to go far in their education. And is also used to confine them to typical racial norms. So I would like to show this video from Vox. If you have the ability, I would watch the entire video. It is really informative on statistics about education and race and how those two play together, but let's just show a clip of it right now.
In 2016, researchers at Yale showed teachers this video clip of 4 preschool students. Their instructions: look for misbehavior and click when you see it. The study was kind of deceptive. None of the kids in the video actually misbehaved. The researchers were using eye tracking software. What they actually wanted to study was who the teachers were watching. Both Black and white teachers spent significantly more time watching the Black boy in the video. This study showed that even preschool teachers can treat kids differently based on their race without even realizing it. Look elsewhere in the US school system and you'll see this show up in other ways, like at this middle school in Bryan, Texas. They gave students tickets for offenses like disrupting class or using profanity. Black students were 4 times more likely than white students to receive those tickets. Nationwide, Black boys miss way more school due to suspensions than any other group. And this can start a kind of chain reaction. Missing weeks of school due to suspensions makes students much more likely to drop out. Without a diploma, you're much less likely to earn a living wage and much more likely to be incarcerated. All this missing school is helping to drive the highest poverty and incarceration rates in the developed world. So it's worth asking, how'd we get here? In 1964, President Lyndon Johnson created a new federal office accountable to the president, the Office for Civil Rights. Its first task was to desegregate public schools in the South. But soon, they started noticing that some schools were segregating their students without actually calling it segregation.
A lot of the Black students would be labeled disabled and removed from the mainstream classroom, so they wound up segregated.
Daniel Lowson studies school discipline. For years, he's been sounding the alarm about how much school Black students are missing due to suspensions. The data he uses in his reports comes from the Office for Civil Rights. In the 1970s, they started requiring schools to report how many students they classified as disabled, plus suspensions and expulsions, all broken down by race and gender. Over the next few decades, those numbers went up as more punitive ideas about discipline took hold in American schools. Well, in some schools.
Gangs and drugs have taken over our streets and undermined our schools.
The idea that if you don't, throw the book at kids when they're young for every little thing, that they're going to turn into criminals. There's never any research to show that it actually worked. You never see that in schools serving mostly white kids.
But in 2011, a new report out of Texas started to cast doubt on that approach. The study looked at discipline records for almost 1 million students. It tracked the same kids from 7th grade all the way through high school. The results were stunning. Nearly 60% of students had been suspended or expelled at least once. The study also showed that Black students facing school discipline for the first time tended to get harsher punishments than white students. And the more disciplinary violations a student received, the more likely they were to drop out.
Okay, so I know that was a bit long of a clip, but I do highly suggest watching the entire video. It is really, really good. So how can we combat racial conformity in the education system? Well, there are 2 specific teaching models that help combat this. One is called the infusion model, which incorporates components of multiculturalism into lesson plans over multiple subject matters. This basically helps students to have more of a cultural awareness and broadens their understanding of diversity and cultures, traditions, and history experiences that may differ from their own. And the other teaching model is called the transformation model, which directly addresses and challenges the ideas of power, privilege, and systemic inequalities within the educational structure. So the curriculum would take a focus more on social justice and equality, human rights. It shifts teachers to utilize methods that meet diverse cultural and linguistic demands of students. And it collaborates with local communities to help integrate more relative matter and perspectives into the curriculum rather than just a generic curriculum. So my discussion leads are, number one, which educational model do you think would best promote equality and inclusion in the school systems? Number two, do you have any experience with witnessing or receiving racism in an educational environment? Number three, do you think the education system today serves to promote equality or reinforce racial conformity? And number four, what changes do you think can be made with other social issues to better support equality and inclusion in educational environments? I can't wait to hear or to read these discussions. So that's all. Thank you for listening to my presentation. Here's my works cited, and I hope you all have an excellent week. Thank you.